Hi, everyone. It's Katie Crysdale here from Lakeview Aquatic Consultants. Welcome back, or welcome if you are new to the channel. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about what we know about the Cultus Lake Waterpark electrocution incident. This is the bulk of what people are asking me about and the bulk of what I covered in the June 17th, 2026 newsletter. If you're new here, each week I take a bit of time and I talk about the weekly newsletter, which includes highlights of the aquatic industry, news stories you need to know, trends, problems that are developing in our industry, things that are people are talking about. And that is what we're going to be doing today. Is I'm going to take you through the newsletter, which is linked in the description box down below. I also want to say a big thank you, everyone, your patience as we've been moving pretty slow recently, the last couple of weeks with YouTube content. Still have some staffing issues, still have some life issues. My husband recovering from surgery, just being very, very busy. And it's funny because I'm usually a very productive person, but the last couple of weeks, it just feels like such a challenge to get every single thing done that I normally get done. So I appreciate your patience because this was meant to be a YouTube week with lots of YouTube content that I've been working on, but it just didn't get out. And it's already 3:30 on a work day when I'm recording this video. By the time we're done, it's going to be 4:30, and another day is going to be pretty much over. But bringing us back to the present. So I'm recording this video on Wednesday, June 17th, 2026. And the same thing with the news that I'm going to be covering in this video. I specifically waited until this morning, probably 8 hours ago, 9 hours ago, to write what we currently know about the Cultus Lake incident because I wanted to be very careful about not reading too much into the speculation that is rampant online. You see the same thing happen recently, I would say the last couple of years on social media, particularly Facebook. Whenever something terrible happens and there's an absence of information while the authorities are investigating, or when the family has requested privacy, people spend all their time and energy spectating and speculating, and that should not replace the factual information. A classic example is there's been this terrible incident in Brazil where this woman died. She was thrown off of a bridge in relation to what was allegedly supposed to be either bungee jumping or a swing jump type of extreme activity, and the rope wasn't attached. You've probably seen it on the fringes of your feed as a viral news story. We don't have any facts right now. So people are sitting around and speculating and reposting and recommenting. And that's not what I want to be doing. I always want to be timely with what I'm reporting. I'm not doing any sort of original reporting, but I'm aggregating what I'm reading. I'm providing context in terms of the aquatic industry as an experienced lifeguard, pool operator, facility manager, somebody who is deeply embedded in the industry in Alberta, but also very cognizant of what is happening in other parts of the industry. I think that is one thing that makes my perspective very different from other aquatic professionals. I am not just in this zone or funnel of how I like to do things or how we do things at a municipality in Alberta or how we do things at a water park in Canada. In my work, in terms of networking and actual consulting work and committee work, I'm very uh, sort of nationally connected within Canada, within North America, and internationally. So to bring it back to Cultus Lake, we, in my opinion, all of this is my opinion right now, we're starting to see a lot more pool related electrocution incidents over the last couple of years. And unfortunately, this is in line with that, in my opinion. It's not casting aspersions on the property. We don't know who is responsible at this stage, what specifically happened. I will get into the broad strokes of the incident here in a moment. But I would say, broadly speaking, in terms of my involvement in the aquatic industry over the last 20 plus years, More recently, the last few years, we have seen, I perceive, an uptick in these types of incidents in Cultus Lake, BC this week. A couple years ago in Canmore, Alberta, there was the fatality of an individual from Saskatchewan who was electrocuted to death at a hot tub in a condo, like residential rental, like Airbnb type situation. And then also in the last few years, there have been electrocution deaths at resorts in Mexico. And I know some people will be likely to throw those out as outliers. Oh, the quality of workmanship is not the same in Mexico as Canada. But I think broadly speaking, we need to be more concerned with what we're seeing happen. And I think, in my opinion, to jump to my conclusion in this newsletter, we're seeing a lot of people feeling comfortable doing basic electrical work that they should not be doing because they're not objectively qualified to do those things. Let's get into the facts of what happened, and that is going to help inform some of our discussion in this week's conversation. So, essentially, on Monday, June 15th, so 2 days ago, because today is Wednesday, there started to be reports of an incident at Cultus Lake. Cultus Lake is a part of interior Columbia. So, it is about an hour and a half east of Vancouver, big city, urban area, and just south of Chilliwack, which is not just a band, it is also a place. There are lots of amenities in this area where families will go for lake vacations. So, when you're driving down the roads in these areas, you're going to see farm stands, you're going to see lakes with beaches, cottage rentals, you're going to see boat rentals, houseboats, all of those family activities like mini golf, farm stands, petting zoos. And along with that, you're going to see some amusement parks, you're going to see go karts, all kinds of things like this. I have never been to Cultus Lake personally, but as I understand it, it is a long-standing water park and dry amusement park. What had happened was essentially there was a group of grade 6 and 7 students, approximately 11 to 13 years in age, from Port Coquitlam, which is an area outside of Vancouver. You might recall from the terrible, I always think of Port Coquitlam, unfortunately, in relation to the pig farm murders in the late 90s and early 2000s. But those children had gone to Cultus Lake for the day. And as it's alleged that there was a number of children that were hurt, people are describing as an electrical event. I'm going to go ahead and call it an electrocution. Electrocution, no different from drowning. It has people's own connotations of seriousness, but I mean electrocution simply as contact with electricity. No different from drowning can be, temporary, permanent, and fatal, submerged. There's quite a range. But essentially, a bunch of children made contact with what they believe the cause was a metal hand railing at the base of a ride called the 060 Raceway Ride, which, if you look at the photos available in the sources I provide in the newsletter, including a CBC newscast, video footage shows a multi person mat based ride, kind of like what you would see at a midway, where a bunch of people go all together and they're racing down the ride to see who gets to the finish line first. It's alleged that these kids made contact with this railing, which was possibly under a steel frame tent. And my speculation, I have no personal information, I have not been to this site, is that that tent was probably aftermarket structure erected for the purposes of providing shade in an open area. Criminality is not suspected, and at this point in time, the park has closed with no scheduled date for reopening. The main issue is the seriousness of the injuries that the children experienced. 12 children went to hospital. Some have already been released with minor superficial burns and numbness, but at least 8 children, as we understand it, are still in hospital, potentially listed as in serious condition. There are reports that CPR was conducted on site. performed on site. And there are also reports that 2 children were life flighted by air ambulance helicopter from Cultus Lake to Vancouver Children's Hospital. So that means certainly a higher level of care and a higher level of urgency to their medical conditions beyond simply transporting them to the local Abbotsford hospital. I do provide some resources in the newsletter, which is linked down below. And you can obviously go online and see a lot of different news agencies reporting on this incident. I've also linked in the newsletter to the initial press release from Cultus Lake. They provide their factual accounting of what happened. And then there are also updates since then, today being Wednesday, in terms of on Tuesday, there was a further update regarding their planned closure, their planned, um, uh, what's the word, cooperation with the local authorities. British Columbia, like Ontario, has regulatory agency for amusement devices, including water slides. So Technical Safety British Columbia, which is that agency, they are on site and actively investigating. And uh, the people at the people at Technical Safety BC know exactly what parents and pool operators are concerned about, because in going to their website today, I noticed that the banner across the main screen was speaking about electrical shock safety. So take with that what you will, that is what they describe as one of their top 5 safety risks, and learn practical ways to reduce that risk when working with electricity. BC Hydro, which is the utility for the region, we call electricity in Canada like your electrical utility hydro, based on the historical creation of electricity from hydroelectric dammed waterways. 60% of electricity in Canada comes from hydroelectric dammed waterways. So it is common to say the hydro bill instead of the power or the electric bill. BC Hydro has identified that the electrical issue originated on the customer side of the electrical service, and it has nothing to do with the infrastructure or equipment on the public or the delivery side. So I thought that was really important to note. Further, there are allegations that the management or ownership of the parks did not close the entire facility right away after the incident. This was one of the comments I saw multiple times online from parents associated with the school group, but I can't independently verify that. The one thing I can say I do find to be unprofessional is that when you go to the website for this business, they have both a water park and a dry amusement area. None of the press release information is available at the top of the page. It does not come up as a pop-up window, does not come up as a banner across the website. You do have to scroll your website page with the mouse or your keyboard keys below the break to see the current status of the site, which is not my recommendation, but I'm not a PR expert either. So, unfortunately, we don't have a ton of details. This incident came up in my committee meeting this morning. I joined my committee meeting a couple minutes late, and it's bad when the organizer says to the committee, is there any new business for the meeting today before we get started? And the chairperson says, yeah, I want to talk about the article Katie put on Facebook today, which was pertaining to Cultus Lake. So, what can we take from this incident? There's a lot of interest in this incident, justifiably so. Unfortunately, 12 young people were potentially very seriously hurt. Electrocution of any form, electricity is very, very dangerous. We've all had basic electrical shocks in our life at some point, whether it was just from static on a balloon to something more serious. And for children to be life flighted via air ambulance or CPR to be delivered tells us that there was, in my speculation, enough extended electrical activity to cause the heart to be dysregulated, to stop pumping potentially. Very, very serious and very, very concerning. I have no doubt that Technical Safety BC will get to the bottom of this And because it is a regulatory office, there will be public disclosure of the results of the investigation. It may not be publicly available right away. We may not see anything substantive for, 3 months or even 3 years. For example, just today, the Transport Safety Board of Canada just came out with their Titan submersible after action review report, and that incident occurred almost 3 years ago. So these things can take time to be done correctly. But I will say that there is a lot of industry interest and motivation to improve on this type of incident. Personally, in my opinion, my own conjecture with my own speculation with nothing to substantiate it at this site, I would say broadly in the industry, as I said at the beginning of this video, too many people feel comfortable doing their own quote basic electrical work in a commercial setting where objectively they are not certified or trained. So, the basic example I would give is that I recently had some light fixtures replaced in my home. I ordered new light fixtures. Could I have watched a YouTube video myself and changed the fixtures myself after turning off the power and using a drill and pliers? Absolutely. Many people told me that. I have had people do that, friends, colleagues do that on other fixtures in my home. But I made a decision. I'm having 3 fixtures installed. I'm going to hire an electrician to do it correctly because I have concerns about other electrical work that has been done in my home, and I wanna protect my safety on a multi-story townhouse and my investment. I don't want my insurance to not pay out a claim should my house were to burn down. I don't want to not have an insurance claim because I did something myself that I shouldn't have done, was not qualified to do. There's a lot of aquatic professionals. We are jacks and jills of all trades. We are willing to learn a lot of different things. But in my opinion, I say this in the certified pool operator course, there's a point at which maintenance stops and troubleshooting begins. I can troubleshoot that my electricity or something electrical doesn't appear to be working, or I can troubleshoot that my gas heater does not appear to be working. My pool appears to be leaking. My filter appears to be cracked. But that's outside the scope of my training, and I would never recommend that somebody without technical, industrial, professional certification do those types of repairs. It could be catastrophic for the person's safety, the equipment's long-term lifespan, or the facility and the customers. So I hope it is something that we can learn from. I hope it is something um yeah, I get there's no winner in this. I mean, people got hurt. The park is going to be impacted professionally, legally, PR wise, liability wise. It's just not good for anyone. Lifeguards are impacted who did CPR. Spectators and guests are impacted by trauma. It's not good. And it doesn't look good for the aquatic industry in Canada either. We try and do our best, but when we have these catastrophic incidents, it really puts a dent in the armor, so to speak, that some bad apples broadly anywhere are making the rest of us who are trying to do good work not look good. So, speaking about the Canmore Inn and Suites incident earlier this year, the creation of chlorine gas through manually feeding chemical feeders that were not in their automated outlets or interlocked, or any other incident that you'll see later in the newsletter. There's a lot of other crappy incidents that I mentioned this week, is just not a good look for our industry because it does create a basis upon which parents and other caregivers can be legitimately concerned about the safety of our aquatic facilities. So that's all I have to say about that this week. We're going to get more info. I'm sure we're going to come back to this story again. Unfortunately, this week we also had a terrible incident, also on Monday/Tuesday in Medicine Hat, Alberta, which is one of the largest cities in Alberta. We don't have a ton of large cities. There's basically Calgary, Edmonton, Red Deer, Lethbridge, and Medicine Hat. And Medicine Hat is located in the southeastern corner of the province, close to Saskatchewan. It is a very arid area, very sunny area. And as best as we understand, a child also on an end of year school trip to an outdoor recreation area drowned fatally during an activity. That's the extent of the information we have. I also have not been to this location, so I'm unclear because City of Medicine Hat aquatic facilities closed in response yesterday. I am therefore assuming that this was a beach type area that was staffed by city staff, city aquatic staff, but I can't speculate too much because there's not a lot of details and the family deserves privacy. So it's just not a great week for pools. And it doesn't get any better. As we go through the news this week, I just like trying hard enough is not always good enough. So let's get into the rest of the news this week as I've presented it in the newsletter. As I've said before, I don't share every news article that I've been reading. I share the ones that I feel like are pertinent to trends we've been talking about, relevant to things that we need to be aware of. So the first one is this was the one story that dominated my social media news cycle over the weekend. I was locked at my desk in my office this weekend on the McDonald's project. Any of you who follow me on Instagram stories, I've been working on this very large project I can't name. I'm calling it the McDonald's project because often you'll find me at 6:30 in the morning at my local McDonald's eating breakfast and coffee because my local library doesn't open till 9:30 and I'm trying to get some dedicated work in. But anyway, this past weekend, this was the big news story when I was breaking from my project to get a rest. And it is that 5-year-old twins fatally drowned. They were allegedly recovered from the bottom of the swimming pool at a Kissimmee, Florida vacation home pool. It was a rental. And the allegation is that the adults went to the grocery store. They left an older child present to supervise the twins. The older child was 15 years old, and those twins were recovered from the bottom of the pool. This is part of the bigger trend we've been talking about, whether you followed this newsletter for a year or whether you followed me on social media for 7 years. I'm not against rentals of pools or homes with pools, but we need to have mechanisms to teach and educate people who are unfamiliar with having that risk in their backyard what that's going to mean. No different from if you were staying in a home with guns and your children were unfamiliar not to touch guns. There is a hazard present that education and supervision may not be top of mind if you don't normally have those items in your home. This news article I missed last week, but it was relevant because I grew up in Ottawa. I swam so many years at Carleton University, and I was so sad to hear that there was an unsuccessful rescue. Doesn't mean the guards were unsuccessful, but the individual may have had, other medical history that impacted them. But there was a man who was removed from drowning in the pool at Carleton U and later succumbed to their injuries and died in hospital. Another big story that is populating the operations, like the pool operations sphere, is the continuing saga of the reflecting pool in Washington, D.C., that President Trump recently had resurfaced. That pool was resurfaced in dark blue, and then it was recently refilled, and the water turned green. I didn't get into a lot of detail in this week's newsletter. Some of this I will share in next week's newsletter because I do try and keep the length of the newsletter manageable. But the main point I think that is worth making is that the public reporting is that the team trying to deal with the algae in the reflecting pool is using hydrogen peroxide, which is a disinfectant that is not always permitted in all jurisdictions. But some of the other items I wasn't able to get into in today's commentary is I do think it's important to recognize that this is a really, really old basin. The turnover, like the water flow, the speed of the turnover is probably pretty slow, simply based on the age of the pool, to say nothing of the size of the pool or the depth of the pool. The other thing that came to mind as they were coating the pool with this dark blue, um, why do people pick dark blue? So President Trump had said he wanted to make it blue, I believe like the American flag, like patriotic blue. But in speaking to somebody earlier about a different project that is being painted blue, I said to them, there's often this marketing in the residential pool industry that a blue background will make the water appear more blue. But the thing to be aware of is anytime we're talking about a darker color, that darker color of the basin or the surface does make the water warm faster. So I listened to a podcast a number of years ago, and I believe it was a water shape professional talking about decorative like viewing pools, fountains, water features not for swimming, very shallow. And I very distinctly recall him saying that these shallower depths and black tile and dark surfaces, he would often install a chiller on the system to prevent algae because he found it was very hard to manage the water chemistry in shallower bodies of water that would heat up very quickly. And heat can contribute to many different things. So, typically, when we talk about sunshine, we talk about chlorine loss. Free available chlorine is easily broken up by UV sunlight. So, if we're talking about direct sun exposure, that is going to cause the chlorine to go away, which in turn can cause algae to thrive or to breed if it is present without chlorine to control it. Further now, let's layer in the relatively shallow depth of the reflecting pool. Now, the darker color accelerating the warming as well as the exposure to the sun, and then the lack of recirculation over the period that the project took place. So, if there was water in the lines, basically water in the pipes that was not drained prior to the start of this project, then once they concluded the project, they refilled the pool, they restarted the system. Some of that old water, which may have had bacteria or algae in it dormant while it was just laying in the pipes, then it's going to shoot back into the pool. Then you're not going to have enough chlorine, not only because of the sunlight, but also because maybe there's a reticence to jack up the chlorine in the presence of a new basin finish. Often, when we talk about basin finishes like a membrane, a liner, maybe a new coating, I believe this was some sort of proprietary coating, they may have warranty requirements about the chemical range that you operate within. Algae is very resistant to regular levels of chlorine, but you may not be able to jack up the chlorine to kill the algae without damaging the pool surface. So it creates this perfect storm, which obviously I was not able to capture in a couple sentences in the newsletter. I'm not saying I support the renovation or don't support the renovation of the reflecting pool, but I do think we need to give some grace that algae in a project like this is not as you know in literature, pathetic fallacy. This is not pathetic fallacy regarding the president. This is just the reality of pool operations in the summer in a warm place like Washington DC. They call it the swamp for a reason. It gets very warm, it's hot, it's humid. I'm sure there's also a lot of tourists around. If somebody's chucking their ice cream wrapper into the reflecting pool, or there's other air pollution, or there's any sort of mechanical issue, the chemical container chlorine jug runs empty, circulation stops due to a power outage, in chemical feeder isn't working, injector is plugged. Like you guys know, as pool operators, there's so many potential reasons that algae occurs even in the best operated pools. Continuing on with other news, here in Calgary, the Village Square Leisure Centre in the Northeast is going to be closed for a year-long renovation. I'm honestly surprised this didn't make a bigger splash in the public media because this is the primary pool in the northeast of Calgary, but they got to close, they got to close. There was some other articles, I'm not gonna necessarily get into some miscommunication that I thought was frankly rage bait. Man accused of exposing himself inside women's locker room. When you read the article, the man got confused, went into the wrong change room. There was nobody there. He got changed. His pants were off, and then somebody came into the change room and he was naked and he didn't realize he was in the wrong change room. I mean, yes, it's awful for the woman maybe and her child, but how many times, male or female, have you accidentally gone into the wrong bathroom, restroom, change room, what have you, in a restaurant? I mean, let's just get on with our lives, people. There's been a rash recently of cases where people who were meant to supervise children didn't. You'll see this week I mentioned incident where a woman was operating an unlicensed in-home daycare and was babysitting when a child went missing and drowned in the pool. There was also the charges this week, the sentencing for the mother and daughter in San Jose, California, who operated a daycare in a home. You guys might recall I talked about this on YouTube a few years ago. The back gate securing the swimming pool was left propped open, apparently in relation to, I believe it was a hose, like watering the plants, and three children fell into the pool. I believe two died and one experienced serious lifelong injuries. One of them has been sentenced to, I believe it was 8 years and 11 years in jail for that. Also, this week, I was pleased to see the mayor in a town. She ordered an internal review of aquatic operations after a drowning, which I thought is very professional. If you have any concerns about what happened in your organization, an investigation is really important before. I mean, we're not hoping to assign blame ever, I hope, but really getting to the root cause, the facts of a case are really, really important to prevent these sorts of things from happening ever again. I mentioned also in this week's newsletter another case where there was chemical overfeed in the pool and people got hurt because there was no interlock installed. I also shared an article pertaining to poor quality water at an older pool that they blamed on the filters. But I think based on the article shows lack of understanding of correct pool operations. I shared a couple of organizations, municipalities that are only going to have one pool open this summer. So there's Asheville, North Carolina. San Antonio is going to offer free swimming this summer. A San Jose water park has just closed unexpectedly after changing ownership. And I'm continuing to beat the drum of these smart glasses. So, continuing to share some of these articles pertaining to people being filmed without their consent, both in change rooms and nude areas, as well as privacy laws pertaining to a vlogger who went to Spain and was refused customer service at an airline because she was filming with her smart glasses, to the horrific a realization that people are inactivating their like their red light, their recording light. There are ways to inactivate it, hide it, remove it. Just, I don't know, just kind of depressing world this week. Shared a couple of other articles pertaining to Florida is going to close a loophole pertaining to sex offenders living within 100 feet of public pools. Talking about a state law to create specific rules around using inflatable backyard pools. This is an ongoing huge issue around the world. A food delivery driver, I believe it was for Uber, was charged after bringing a delivery of alcohol to a teenager without verifying their age on delivery. Teenager consumed the alcohol and they then later experienced a fatal drowning. The city of New York, Mayor Mondami is looking to offer more free swim lessons. Again, as we discussed a few weeks ago with the Vancouver proposal, this is a good idea in principle, but in practice, we cannot rely on our already overworked and underpaid aquatic professionals, facility operators to do this. How are we funding this? Yes, I'm not a resident of New York City. Maybe I shouldn't care, but I think we need to stop creating these goodwill opportunities without acknowledging what they cost to fund and operate. At the end of the newsletter, I did share that David Hockney died. He is a painter. You might have encountered his beautiful swimming pool paintings. I believe the one I shared in the newsletter actually was recently sold at auction a few years ago. But yeah, it was just not a great week for our industry. And it's only Wednesday. Um, yeah, I mean, you kind of have these ebbs and flows. That's kind of life. That's the season. That's the work that we all do. But yeah, I'm definitely feeling it the last couple of weeks, just being very busy and it being summer and there being so much going on. The last thing I will point out in the newsletter, in case you don't subscribe to our YouTube channel, is I did reshare a video that I got out last week. It is some rage bait pertaining to basically Fox One, which is a online cable TV provider who is streaming the FIFA World Cup, and they had a terrible ad pertaining to a lifeguard who is not lifeguarding a pool properly and lets somebody drown. So I did get that video out last week, and I did also put a new thumbnail on a video that I did 2 years ago. Some of you might have listened to it at the time. This was with Jeffrey Napolsky of swimmingideas.com. If you didn't watch that video, definitely recommend it. Jeffrey has his own swimming lesson curricula that is offered all around the world at many, many different sites, and it is a very low cost option to license and deliver at your aquatic facility. And I interviewed him shortly after the announcement. I believe it was in 2020 or 2021 that the Canadian Red Cross Swim and Water Safety Program would be ending at the end of that year. So by 2022, 2023, we're starting to see a gap in service options. There is the Life Saving Society Swim for Life program. There are private programs like, for example, Starfish Aquatics or whatever regional programs you might have. But I'm still on the hunt to support those aquatic facilities that want to do their own thing. And that is what led me to Jeffrey's website and talking with him about the lessons that are offered in his program. That's it for this week. Thanks so much for joining me. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and I will see you next week. Bye for now.